So it's time to go and add Redux to our application. And as mentioned in the introduction, we're going to be following the Redux best practices to do this. We're going to follow all of their essential rules. We're going to follow their strongly recommended rules and also the recommended rules as well. So what we have is a Redux state management system that follows all of the best practices from what Redux say are the best practices, of course. And we'll also soon be looking at Redux Toolkit, which is one of their strongly recommended suggestions to use this for writing our Redux logic. As we progress, we'll take a look at this and we'll compare this to how Redux has traditionally been used and what benefits we get from using this Redux Toolkit. And this is brilliant, by the way, because one of the criticisms of Redux in the past has been the amount of boilerplate that you need to add to your code to actually make use of it. But this takes a lot of that pain away, and we'll make a comparison to using that versus Redux. So let's go to our application and start getting our hands dirty and write the code. And gazooks, I've left some unused imports in my application from the last section. I'll deal with that soon. And at the moment, we'll just go ahead and install Redux and deal with that later. So because we're installing a client package, we need to cd into the client folder, and then we just use npm install redux and react-redux. These are the two tools we need initially to make use of this. And there we go. Now that is available. And inside the source folder, inside features, let's make use of our contact page this time to cover the concepts or the very basics about Redux before we actually start modifying the important stuff in our application. Just like the About page, we're going to use this as a kind of experiment area just to take a look at a few basics of Redux. And what we'll start with, we'll create a new file inside the contact folder, and I'm going to call it counter reducer. And I apologize for this because this is the Hello World example of Redux that we're going to take a look at. And it's very basic. We're just going to have a counter that we can increment and decrement. But it does serve a useful purpose of seeing how Redux actually works. So it is very basic. And if you are familiar with Redux, then speed this up and just go as quickly as possible to the next lesson where we talk about Redux Toolkit to compare against if you've not used that before. But for the time being, we're just dealing with the real basics in Redux. Keep it nice and simple first of all. And what we'll do in our reducers is we'll create an interface, and I'm going to call it counter state. And all we're going to have at the moment is just a single property in here called data. And when we create a reducer in Redux, we need to give it some initial state. So I'll say const initial state, and this is going to be of type counter state. And then we just initialize any values that we need inside here. So I'm going to set data to be 42. And then we need to go and create our reducer function. So we'll say export default. And we'll say function. And we'll call the function counter reducer. And we pass it as arguments the state, which is going to be our initial state. And then we pass it any actions. And I'm just going to give our action parameter a type of any. Now our actions are what we dispatch to our reducers to change the state in some way. And we'll come on to those soon, but for now we're just going to return the initial state. So we're just going to say return state. And then inside our app folder we'll create a new folder and call it store. And inside here we'll create a new file and we'll call it configure store.ts. And each Redux application has a single store that contains all of our states, and in our case we've got one slice inside our state, or going to have one slice inside our state, which is our single reducer. And inside here we'll create a function and we'll say export function configure store, and we're going to return, and Redux comes with a function called create store, which we'll import from Redux. And inside our create store, then we pass this any reducers. So I'm going to pass in the reducer that we created called the counter reducer. And that's our Redux store now created. And if we go to our index.tsx page, we can use our store. So I'm going to say const store equals configure store, the function we've just created. And just as a very quick example of being able to see what's inside our store, I'm just going to use console.log. And then if we access our store and take a look at the methods we have available, one of them is called getState. And if we just take a look at what we get when we log this output to our console, and I'll just go across to our application and just refresh the page and take a look at the console, what we should find is that we have an object inside here. Let's just refresh the page again. And we can see that we've got the contents of our Redux store visible inside here. So this is the entire state that we currently have. Very simple just now, but we can see the outputs inside here. Now we want to be able to provide this data to our application, and the way that we do that is we use React Redux, and that comes with a provider that we can use, and we've been using providers to provide things to our app before, and let's continue to do so. So below the store provider, we'll specify provider, which we get from, and we get this from React Redux, so do make sure you've got the provider here. And then we can close this off and pass our app in as a child component, and we pass our provider the store. And now our React application has access to everything that's inside this store. And if we head across to our contact page, let's just display the data from our store inside this page as a very early example. And in fact, let's go back to our counter reducer and add another piece of state inside here as well for the title. And I'll give it a title of Yark, which is going to stand for yet another Redux counter, as this is so common to specify lists. And I'll also give the title property or add that to the interface as well. And we'll use the title and the data inside our contact page. So how do we get the data from the store? Well, the reason we're using React Redux is this gives us a couple of hooks we can use that help us to get and use the data from our Redux store. And what I'll do is I'll just use destructuring to go and get these values. And the hook that we want here is the use selector hook from React Redux. And then what we can do is pass this the state as a parameter, and then we can specify states, and we can destructure the data and the title from our selector there. But we're getting TypeScript warnings saying that property title does not exist on type default root state, and that's just because we need to give our state its type, and we'll specify that state is a type of counter state. And then the warnings go away. So we can replace contact page for title. And below our contact page, let's just add a fragment so we can add two different elements here. And we'll cut typography, put it inside here. Do a bit of reformatting. I'll just copy this line down and change the variant to an H5. And then inside here, we'll say that data is colon, and then say in curly brackets we'll specify data. And if we go take a look, what we should find is that we've got a bunch of warnings, but let's just ignore them and see what happens when we refresh the page and go to the contact page, and we can see both the title and the data inside here. So now we're getting our data from our Redux store and displaying it inside our component, which is exactly what we're looking for right now. And now we've seen that, what we'll take a look at next is how we can dispatch actions to our Redux reducer to update the data inside this store.